I'd like to tell you a story about a radio station, and it's not just any old radio station, it's a Royal Navy radio station on board HMS Illustrious, R06 in 1982. And leading up to that, when I was a boy, I just yearned to be a disc jockey on the wireless. I had record players and tape recorders set up in my bedroom when I was a kid at home, and I made these make-believe radio programs to play on loudspeakers that I had set up all around the house. It drove my mother mad. I had a loudspeaker behind the toilet in the bathroom, and one day my Auntie Audrey came flying out of the bathroom after I blasted her with some David Whitfield while she was having a pee. She said she liked David Whitfield, so I thought I would treat her. And on the recommendation of my friend Alistair some years later, I joined a hospital radio station. They gave me a Saturday afternoon slot after listening to the demo tape that I'd made in my bedroom. My friend Kenny Everett made me some jingles.
Chichester Hospital Radio. It's really wonderful. The Mike Spice Show.
Classic Kenny Everett jingles. I was so proud of those. I felt I'd made the big time having Kenny sing my name.
Mike Spice is nice.
My afternoon programme was comedy, cuts of Tony Hancock and Round the Horn, Marty Feldman, Kenneth Williams, cut together with bits of music, and I thought that was great fun radio. I don't know how the patients listening in bed at the hospital felt, but I hope they enjoyed it. At 16 years old, it was time to leave home and go and join the Navy, so all thoughts of being a disc jockey had to be on hold while I learned how to wear an NBCD suit and make a white sauce. My first ship was HMS Ark Royal, and it didn't take too long to realise that big loud speaker on the bulkhead was playing records from a studio on board ship. We were too far from home to be listening to Pete Murray or Tony Blackburn, so someone somewhere had a record player and I wanted to know about it. I mean, my heart missed a beat. A pirate radio station on Ark Royal, wow. And I really wanted to go on the SRE, but I had no chance. A baby Wafu chef on his first day at sea. No old sea dog's going to let me anywhere near those turntables. But I did manage to make friends with the Weetabix kid, Steve Olive, one of the DJs. He used to let me go in while he was doing a show, and I could film bits and see how it all worked. And Steve and I became good run-ashore oppos, but I never did get onto 433. Fast forward to 1982, and I find myself in Newcastle, and we're storing ship ready to get HMS Illustrious to sail to the Falklands. It was going to be our job to provide air cover while the Army finished building the runway at Port Stanley, and it meant that HMS Invincible could come home from her tour of duty. The Argentine Surrender happened on the 14th of June 82, and I think we got down there in late August. I was walking up the gangway, a box of beans on my shoulder as we were storing ship, and I had this eureka moment. There must be an SRE somewhere on HMS Illustrious. So I made it my job that day to find out who was in charge, and it turned out to be Fleet Chief Petty Officer Andy Homfray. He had a budget, he was going to make it happen, and he wanted a team of people to go on the radio. So I made it my next job to find him and throw myself at his feet. 3 weeks later, I'm part of a very sweet team of lads whose job it was to entertain the troops. There was Paddy Toner, Ozzy Osbourne, Nigel Wilkinson, myself and Andy. A little bit later on we took on Smudge, the MEM stoker who liked his heavy metal, Pete the steward, and Spud Murphy, I think it was as well. So there was a gang of us to entertain everybody. And Andy wanted a proper radio station. He went off to Radio Metro and he appeared on the Giles Squire show and didn't appeal for anyone to donate us their records and tapes to take with us, so we had some music to play. A typical aircraft carrier just comes with the standard NATO issue radio rack, which is no good for doing a radio station, and to say we were inundated with records and tapes would be an understatement. We found ourselves sinking under the amount of records and tapes that arrived at the gangway. I mean, there were thousands of them. And we took it in turns to sift through the piles and piles of records and decide what we could take and what we had to leave behind. We had such a small compartment, we had to make some decisions about what records we couldn't take with us, which was a great shame. And that took nearly a week, and we stored everything we wanted to keep and the rest went back ashore. The standard issue Puss's radio rack's not ideal when you're going away to sea and you want to be able to entertain the troops. Every compartment on the ship has an SRE speaker in it mounted on the bulkhead, and it's usually a 2-channel affair, a 100-volt line loudspeaker. Channel B, we would always put the World Service or an English-speaking news station on if you could pick it up, of course, and depending on where you were on the planet, shortwave World Service was usually a good choice. And then channel A would always be the SRE. And that could just be cassette tapes or someone playing records, or in our case a full-on pirate radio station with jingles and record players and half a dozen disc jockeys with shitloads of records to play all day long. Let's have a look at that standard NATO issue radio rack for an aircraft carrier SRE, shall we? We'll begin looking at the left of this rack, and you'll see 2 radio tuners at the top, 1 tuner for each channel, A and B, which is fine, as I say, if you can pick up 2 channels in the middle of the Atlantic or wherever you happen to be. They were AM, FM and shortwave, and very nice tuners they were too. Under the 2 tuners, 2 8-track tape players, car 8-track tape players as well, but just mounted on the rack instead of on a dashboard. And under the 8-track tapes, 2 car cassette players, no radio, just cassette players. I think they were Marantz tape players, and then the pull-out control panel with a gooseneck mic and some faders. And a little LED light to tell you when the main tannoy was making an announcement from the bridge, because that would cut off the SRE while they did their pipe and light up an LED in the rack so you know you were cut off. In the middle of the rack, check out that record player. It's a Garrard 401. I mean, a vintage gramophone if ever there was one. Really special. They're worth an absolute fortune today. And above that, our reel-to-reel tape recorder. And that took a 10-inch nab reel, and at its slowest speed you could squeeze about 8 hours out of one side. That meant we could record back-to-back LPs to play when we were in something like defence watches and couldn't get down there. In the right of the rack, some 7-inch records, and on the top shelf my Plessy jingle cart machine, and this was taken just before we moved into our little cupboard to make the radio station, because there was no way you could stand at this rack and do a 4-hour radio show on one turntable and nowhere to sit. BFBS, British Forces Broadcasting Service, would send out syndicated radio shows on C120 cassettes, and you could play those in the rack, and the cassette player would turn over and play both sides, and you get 2 hours of music as long as the tape didn't decide to shred itself. And that did happen, but you certainly couldn't stand at that turntable for 4 hours and do a request show. And in this same compartment was the ship's TV studio, and there was a very small store cupboard. And Andy managed to persuade Bob, the chief of the TV studio, to give us that store so we could turn it into our little radio studio. And Andy had a budget. We suggested he go off to Tandy in Newcastle, and he bought a small mixer, 2 record players and a cassette deck. We already had the reel-to-reel, and we found some foam to put under the record players, and I got some capacitors and a couple of single-throw toggle switches so we could have instant start record players and queue up records. And Bob Geach, the chief tiffy in charge of the department, he did a double take one day when he saw me in my Cook's whites soldering capacitors to these toggle switches, explaining why they were needed to stop the decks making an electrical click noise when you started them. And Ozzy and I went across Pompey Dockyard. I can't remember which ship we went on, but we went on a RAS and found some metal shelves from another ship to store all our records on. We had a chippy come down and put a bench in for us and covered it in nice green cloth. I wired it all up, and we ran a lead back to the NATO rack to plug us into the system. In that little studio, we were sitting on top of an FFO inspection hatch, sitting there playing records and smoking. I mean, you'd never do that today. And to get around the tannoy taking us out when they made a pipe, I asked Bob if he would repeat the LED on the rack to our studio so we could shut up when they were making a pipe from the bridge. And he and I spent an evening running coax from the rack in our studio, and we put a little LED light right on the tip of the microphone so when you were talking you could see if you'd been cut off by the main tannoy system. Some of the ship's pipes could be long enough that you would miss a record, or you could talk for 5 minutes and no one would hear you. Especially heading for the Falklands, and we were getting daily sit-reps on the tannoy system to tell us what was happening, so it was very handy to have that little LED on the mic. And looking at the studio, you can see our 2 record players and the cassette deck and the jingle player with some carts and a discreetly placed ashtray. It did get a bit bumpy down there some days, but the foam under the record players meant you could pretty much carry on playing records. And a spot of Harry Ruffers, maybe not a KTEL LP, but 7-inch singles would pretty much play without jumping around. It really was so much fun on that station. No adverts, no PRS, just wall-to-wall music and taking the piss. Of course, you can't take the piss these days. They don't like it, do they? A very special time being part of Radio 265.
That's the Thompson Twins and a good song from them called Sister of Mercy. Right, what have we got next? What's over here? Oh yeah, Ian Bartlett in the stores office phoned up and said he'd like a record for these Camacho people over here. So for these here Camachos, this one, don't be a hero. Right, that's enough of that. That's boring. 1974, Paper Lace and Billy Don't Be a Hero. There, see, it was. That was a naff record, that. Right, now Graham in the Main Galley was supposed to be next with Squeeze and Up to Junction, but we haven't got it. Seems to be our motto. Sorry, mate, we haven't got it. Anyway, so, moving right along, as I say, in DJ land, down the old list here. Colin Money in 63, Hammer to Fall by Queen from the album Works. That's for Tom Simpson in the Main Galley. Well done, Tom, as I said. And a thing called Driver's Seat from Sniff and Diaz. Right, who's next? Robbie in the RP's Mess. Now, he wanted some yellow, so I've chosen a track off Secret Messages. This is a title track called Secret Messages. Also for Billy Beavers from Colin Money. Is that right? No.
From Billy Beavers to Colin Money.
You told me the other way around.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
You did. You did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Get off.
Rules from 1980 and a thing called Clean Clean, which comes off an album called The Age of Plastic. That's going out for Jason Cropper, who just finished his number 9 punishment cleaning. Ha 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 ha. No, I don't think we'll say anything more about that.
Have another cigarette.
Another 5,000 to get through. Enough of this. For Joe Haynes, this is Billy Joel from the album
The Stranger.
The Stranger. It's a thing called Scenes from Italian Restaurant.
You're tuned to Radio Illustrious, on the air morning, noon and night, 7 days a week throughout the ship. So don't get bored, on board with Radio Illustrious, the bright one.
You can't win, can you? Good morning, it's just gone 7:15. Here's Al Giro. Bringing the time almost at 3 minutes past 7. That's the Beatles and Hello Goodbye, and before that Randy Crawford and One Hello. Good morning, it's Saturday the 28th of May. For me to do is thank you on behalf of all the SRE operators over the Defence Watch and the last trip for listening to us and for helping us out. If Andy Humphrey is up early in the morning, he has promised to do a breakfast show, but that remains to be seen. We know what he's like. And also from all of us here, we'd like to wish you all a very good leave, wouldn't we, Oz?
We would, yes.
Yes, I've got Ozzy sitting here very quietly this time. Makes a change, doesn't it?
Just not say good night to my listener.
He's done it. And from me too, I'll see you soon. Have a very good leave, and I'll see you next time round. Bye-bye.
That's all, folks.
Whenever you were off duty, you could go down to the studio and turn off the tape and start a radio program playing requests, and it wasn't long until extension 265 was ringing off the hook for people wanting to hear a record. So we used to say, phone us on 265 and we'll play you a record you didn't ask for. We need more radio stations like that. I mean, radio today is just shockingly bland with all those adverts. Horrible, horrible thing. So Andy, Nigel, Ozzy, Paddy, Pete, Smudge, Spud, love you long time, boys. We just had so much fun down in 7 Romeo. And talking of the Falklands, once we did get down there, our job was to provide air cover for the army while they were finishing the runway. And during our time down at Port Stanley, once we got there, there was an opportunity for some of us to go and live ashore for a couple of weeks. And I found myself living ashore and working at the governor's house, Sir Rex Hunt, and frying chips for him and drinking his whiskey and cooking for the senior officers, along with a couple of army boys and a couple of our stewards from Illustrious. We made ourselves at home in Port Stanley for a couple of weeks. It wasn't uncommon to take a few beers home with you when the bar closed so we could carry on drinking into the early hours of the morning. And to be in Port Stanley at that point in time and seeing the state of the place and imagining what must have gone on before we got there. We'll finish this up by remembering all those boys who didn't come home from the Falklands. We'll never forget you, chaps. Rest in peace. We've got the watch now.